At 11:47 p.m., Ella White, one of the most powerful female CEOs in the tech industry, sat frozen in her own executive boardroom. Not leading a meeting, but held at gunpoint by her own security team. The glass walls that once symbolized her transparency policy now trapped her in a nightmare broadcast live to the entire company, with 3 armed guards ensuring no one could enter. For 6 hours, employees watched helplessly as their leader faced accusations of corporate espionage, her career crumbling in real time on every screen. But on the 4th floor, a night shift janitor named Seth Newman noticed something everyone else missed. The reflection in the boardroom's glass showed a laptop screen, and the cursor was moving on its own. What Seth saw in that reflection would unravel a conspiracy so deep it would expose not just who was really controlling that laptop, but who had orchestrated the entire hostage situation to seize control of a billion-dollar empire. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The emergency lights in the Apex Technologies boardroom cast shadows across Ella White's face as she sat perfectly still, hands folded on the polished mahogany table. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, 300 employees watched from their cubicles, their faces illuminated by the live video feed being broadcast on every monitor throughout the 40-story headquarters in downtown Harborview. 6 hours had passed since her own security team had locked her inside, and Ella had learned to measure time by the small movements she was allowed. Breathing, blinking, and the occasional shift in her chair that didn't trigger a warning from the 3 armed guards positioned at each exit. Alec Jennings, her VP of Operations, and the man she'd mentored for 8 years, stood outside the glass with a microphone, his voice echoing through the building's speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is difficult to witness, but we have irrefutable evidence that Ms. White has been selling our proprietary AI technology to foreign competitors. The FBI has been notified, and we're conducting this containment for everyone's safety until they arrive." Ella's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Any protest would be edited, twisted, used against her. She'd learned that 3 hours ago when her attempt to explain had been cut off mid-sentence and replayed in a loop as evidence of her guilty panic. The screens throughout Apex showed carefully curated clips. Her entering the building at odd hours, working late. Her encrypted communications, standard executive security. Her offshore accounts, legitimate international business holdings. Each piece of normal CEO behavior reframed as evidence of treachery. On the 4th floor, Seth Newman pushed his cleaning cart past a cluster of software engineers who barely registered his presence. At 42 years old, with graying temples and the kind of weathered hands that came from years of manual labor, Seth had perfected the art of invisibility. Night shift janitors moved through corporate spaces like ghosts, present but unseen, overhearing conversations that people assumed were private. It was a skill he'd cultivated deliberately over the past 4 years, ever since his world had collapsed and this job had become his refuge. He paused near a window overlooking the executive floor, 20 stories above. The boardroom was visible from this angle, a glass box suspended in space. Seth had been watching the situation unfold for hours, not out of morbid curiosity, but because something felt fundamentally wrong. He'd seen hostage situations before, real ones, and this didn't match the pattern. The guards were too relaxed, their positioning too theatrical. They were facing outward, toward the watching employees, not inward toward the supposed threat. Seth pulled out his phone, zoomed in on the boardroom's reflection in the opposite building's windows. The angle created a mirror effect, showing what the cameras inside couldn't capture. There, on the laptop positioned in front of Ella, but facing away from her. The cursor was moving. Documents were being opened, files were being transferred, and Ella's hands remained motionless on the table. Someone was remotely accessing that computer, creating evidence in real time while she sat powerless to stop it. His heart rate accelerated. Seth knew that technique. He'd designed security systems to prevent exactly that kind of intrusion back when he'd been director of cybersecurity at Apex. Back when his wife Lila had been alive and his 7-year-old daughter hadn't learned yet what it meant to lose a parent. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. But the expertise remained, buried under 4 years of grief and deliberate obscurity. Seth made a decision. He abandoned his cleaning cart and headed for the service elevator, the one that still recognized his old biometric signature because the system hadn't been updated since he designed it. As he descended toward the executive floor, he pulled up schematics on his phone, architectural plans he'd memorized when Apex had first built this tower. Every building had vulnerabilities if you knew where to look, and Seth had ensured this one had specific access points for emergency scenarios. Back when he'd still believed the company cared about protecting people rather than protecting profits. The executive floor was eerily quiet. Most employees had been sent to the main atrium to watch the spectacle on the massive screens there, turning Ella's imprisonment into a company-wide event. Only security personnel remained, and they were focused on the boardroom entrance, not the service corridors. Seth moved silently, years of janitorial work having taught him how to navigate spaces without drawing attention. He reached a maintenance panel near the boardroom's eastern wall, the one that housed the environmental controls. Seth opened it with a key he'd kept from his previous life. One of many small acts of insurance he'd maintained even after his forced resignation. Inside the panel was access to the building's network infrastructure, cables and switches that controlled everything from temperature to communications. Seth connected a small device, something he'd built years ago and kept updated out of habit, a remnant of the paranoid security expert he used to be. It took 30 seconds to establish a bridge into the boardroom's isolated network, another 20 to confirm what he'd suspected. The laptop in front of Ella was being controlled remotely from an IP address inside the building, specifically from Alec Jennings' office 3 floors down. The evidence was damning, but Seth needed more. He needed to understand why, and he needed leverage to stop it. His fingers moved quickly across his phone's interface, tracing network traffic, following digital breadcrumbs. What he found made his blood run cold. This wasn't just about framing Ella. The files being planted on her system were authorization codes for Apex's most valuable asset. The Sentinel AI, a machine learning system worth billions that could revolutionize cybersecurity, or in the wrong hands, bypass it entirely. Alec wasn't just destroying Ella's career. He was stealing technology that could destabilize global digital infrastructure, and he was using her as the scapegoat. Once she was arrested, once the FBI seized her systems and found the evidence being planted right now, Alec would have complete control of Apex and its technology. The board would appoint him as emergency CEO, and by the time anyone discovered the truth, the Sentinel AI would be long gone, sold to the highest bidder. Seth's hands trembled as he disconnected his device. He thought about his daughter Zoe, currently asleep at his sister's apartment across town. Her homework spread across the kitchen table where she'd been practicing multiplication. He thought about the promise he'd made when Lila died, to keep their daughter safe, to never again put himself in situations that might leave Zoe without any parents at all. Walking away right now would honor that promise. But he also thought about Lila's last words in the hospital, after the server room fire that Apex had caused through negligence, and then covered up by destroying records and threatening witnesses. Promise me you'll fight for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Zoe needs to grow up knowing her father stood for something. Seth closed the maintenance panel and headed for the boardroom service entrance, the one built into the wall that employees didn't know existed. As he moved through the shadows, he activated his phone's video recording. Whatever happened next, he needed documentation. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. The service door opened silently into a small alcove behind a decorative wall panel. Through the gap, Seth could see Ella clearly for the first time. Her expression was composed, but her eyes held the kind of exhausted desperation he recognized intimately. It was the same look he'd worn for months after Lila's death, the expression of someone watching their world burn while others applauded the flames. Seth checked the guards' positions, then did something that would either save Ella White's life or end his own freedom. He stepped out from behind the panel, hands raised, and walked calmly into the boardroom. The guards' weapons swung toward him instantly. Outside the glass, employees gasped. Phones came up to record. Alec's voice crackled over the speakers, confused and angry. Who the hell authorized access? But Seth ignored everyone except Ella. He met her startled gaze and said quietly, calmly, with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Ms. White, my name is Seth Newman. 4 years ago, this company destroyed my life after my wife died in a fire they caused. I have evidence that proves you're being framed right now, in real time. But if you want to survive this, you need to trust me, and we need to move fast. Ella's eyes widened, searching his face for deception or madness. Seth held her gaze, steady and clear. In the reflection of the glass, he could see Alec shouting orders, security teams mobilizing. They had maybe 2 minutes before this situation spiraled beyond his control. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The laptop in front of you, Seth continued, his voice urgent but controlled, is being remotely accessed from Alec Jennings's office. He's planting evidence as we speak. I can prove it, but not here. Not with these cameras broadcasting everything we say. There's a way out of this room that they don't know about. But you have to decide right now. Do you trust the system that put you here? Or do you trust the janitor who knows how the system really works? Ella White stared at the janitor who had just walked into her nightmare and offered her the first thread of hope in 6 horrifying hours. His uniform was standard Apex maintenance gray, his ID badge slightly worn, but his eyes held an intensity that didn't match the humble role. More than that, there was a precision in his movements, a calculated awareness of the guards' positions and camera angles that spoke of training far beyond cleaning floors. I know who you are, Ella said quietly, pieces clicking together in her mind. Seth Newman. You were director of cybersecurity. You resigned 4 years ago after the server room incident. They said you couldn't handle the pressure after your wife passed. They lied. Seth's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Lila didn't just die. She was killed by negligence that Apex covered up, and when I tried to expose it, they destroyed my career and threatened to take my daughter. So I disappeared into the one job where I could stay close enough to watch and wait. One of the guards moved toward Seth, weapon raised. Sir, you need to exit immediately. Seth didn't look at the guard. He kept his eyes locked on Ella's. 3 years ago, your chief technology officer, Reggie Bishop, started compiling evidence of systematic corruption in Apex's executive board. He documented safety violations, financial fraud, and technology theft. 6 months ago, he died of a supposed heart attack at his desk. I have what he collected. Because Reggie knew something like this was coming. He knew they'd eventually come for you. Ella's breath caught. Reggie had been more than her CTO. He'd been her friend, her partner in building Apex from a startup in a basement office to a technology giant. His death had devastated her, but the autopsy had been conclusive. Massive coronary failure. Tragic, but natural. Reggie had no history of heart problems. No, Seth agreed, but he did have a history of asking uncomfortable questions about where certain contract payments were going, about why security protocols kept getting overridden for specific clients, about the real reason 18 people have resigned from Apex in the past 3 years after discovering things they shouldn't have. The guard grabbed Seth's arm. "Security to Boardroom. We have an unauthorized entry." Seth finally looked at the guard, and something in his expression made the man hesitate. "Check the laptop's network traffic logs. Check which office is sending remote commands to this machine right now. Unless you're already aware of what Alec Jennings is doing, in which case you're not security, you're accomplices." Through the glass walls, Ella could see the situation escalating. More security personnel were arriving. Alec was directing them with urgent hand signals, and the employees watching from below were capturing every moment on their phones. If Seth was wrong, if this was some kind of breakdown or delusion, then she'd just added aiding an intruder to her list of charges. But if he was right, then everything she'd believed about Reggie's death, about her company, about the people she'd trusted, was a carefully constructed lie. The service corridor. Ella made her decision. Behind the eastern wall panel. I noticed it during renovation planning, but never understood its purpose. Emergency extraction route, Seth explained, already moving. Required by federal security protocols for executive protection, but most people forget they exist. I designed it to be unobtrusive. The guard tightened his grip on Seth's arm. "Nobody's going anywhere." Seth moved with sudden, precise violence. He twisted, broke the guard's hold with a technique that was definitely not janitorial training, and had the man's own weapon pointed at the floor before the other 2 guards could react. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Seth said calmly, "but I will protect her. You need to decide right now if you're following orders or following the law, because those 2 things are not the same today." Ella stood, her legs unsteady after hours of sitting. If you fire those weapons with all these people watching, with phones recording everything, it becomes a much bigger story than Apex can contain. Seth is giving you an out. Take it. The other 2 guards exchanged glances. One of them, younger than the others, lowered his weapon slightly. "Sir, maybe we should let security handle this. We're just supposed to maintain position, not engage." The older guard's expression was conflicted. Through his earpiece, Ella could hear Alec's voice shouting contradictory orders, the panic of a plan falling apart. "If you leave this room, Ms. White, it's evidence of guilt. You're fleeing." "I'm escaping a hostage situation," Ella corrected. "There's a legal difference." Seth was already at the wall panel, fingers finding the hidden latch. The section swung open, revealing a narrow corridor lit by emergency lighting. "Ella, now." She moved toward him, her heels clicking on marble before she kicked them off, making the decision to trust this stranger who somehow felt less foreign than the people she'd worked with for years. As she passed the young guard, she said quietly, "Check Alec's office. Check what he's doing right now. Then decide who the real criminal is." Seth guided her into the corridor, and the panel closed behind them, muffling the chaos erupting in the boardroom. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, designed for quick evacuation rather than comfort. Emergency strips provided dim illumination as they moved deeper into the building's hidden infrastructure. "Where does this lead?" Ella asked, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Service basement, but we're not going straight there. First, we need to get to my locker. Everything Reggie gave me is hidden there, including the only complete backup of his evidence files." They descended through narrow staircases that felt more like the interior of a ship than a corporate building. Ella's world had shrunk to the sound of their footsteps and Seth's steady breathing ahead of her. "Why didn't you come forward before?" "If you had evidence of corruption, of Reggie's suspicions." "Because I have a 7-year-old daughter named Zoe who depends on me," Seth's voice echoed back. "When they destroyed my career, they made it clear that if I caused problems, I'd lose custody. They had lawyers, documentation, enough manufactured evidence to paint me as unstable. I couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk her growing up in foster care because I was stubborn about justice." The raw honesty in his words hit Ella hard. She'd been so focused on building her company, on success and innovation, that she'd never stopped to consider what happened to the people who fell through the cracks. "I'm sorry. I didn't know about what happened to you and your wife. If I had..." "You were traveling for the Tokyo expansion when Lila died," Seth said. No accusation in his tone, just fact. "By the time you got back, the story was already written. Electrical fault, tragic accident, no one to blame. I tried to tell you the truth, but Alec intercepted every attempt, said you were too busy with the acquisition to be bothered with maintenance issues." Ella felt sick. How many other tragedies had been kept from her? How many people had suffered while she'd been insulated in executive decisions and strategic planning? Reggie knew, didn't he? That's why he started investigating. Reggie figured out that Lila's death wasn't isolated. There were patterns. Safety complaints ignored, whistleblowers silenced, inspection records altered. He realized Apex had been cutting corners for years to maximize profits, and the board had been covering it up. When he confronted them, they made him part of the inner circle, gave him the CTO position thinking it would buy his silence. But it didn't. No. Reggie was too much like you, too idealistic to be corrupted. So he gathered evidence, built a case, and prepared to expose everything. He gave me copies of his files 3 weeks before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should find a way to get them to you. Said you were the only person in leadership he trusted to do the right thing. They reached a landing, and Seth paused, checking his phone. Security is searching the main building, but they haven't thought to check the service areas yet. We have maybe 10 minutes. Ella leaned against the concrete wall, processing everything. If Alec has been planning this, if he's working with the board to frame me, then going public with evidence won't be enough. They'll call it fabricated, revenge from a disgruntled former employee. Which is why Reggie was smart, Seth said, a hint of admiration in his voice. He didn't just document what they did. He documented their communications, their planning, their explicit knowledge of the crimes they were covering up. There are emails, recorded phone calls, financial transfers. It's not just evidence of corruption, it's evidence of conspiracy. The service basement of Apex Technologies was a stark contrast to the gleaming corporate floors above. Exposed pipes ran along concrete ceilings. The air carried the smell of industrial cleaning supplies and machine oil, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that most people found uncomfortable. For Seth, it had become a kind of sanctuary, a space where corporate politics and betrayal couldn't reach. He led Ella through a maze of corridors, past equipment rooms and utility stations, until they reached a small break area that night shift maintenance workers used. A battered couch sat against one wall. A coffee maker perpetually stained sat on a folding table, and a row of lockers lined the back wall. It was profoundly unglamorous, and Ella found herself grateful for its obscurity. Seth opened his locker with a combination lock, revealing a space that was meticulously organized. Uniforms hung neatly. Cleaning supplies were stacked precisely, and in the back, secured with another lock, was a fireproof box. He retrieved it carefully, treating it with the reverence of someone handling something precious and dangerous. "Reggie gave you all of this?" Ella asked as Seth placed the box on the folding table. "Over the course of 2 years," Seth explained, opening the box to reveal 3 external hard drives, a stack of USB drives, and a sealed envelope with Ella's name handwritten on it. He couldn't risk keeping everything in one place. He'd leave items in drop locations, I'd secure them, and we'd only communicate through methods he was certain were unmonitored. Ella picked up the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Reggie had always preferred for important documents. She opened it carefully, finding several pages in Reggie's distinctive handwriting. "Ella," she read aloud, her voice catching, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and they've made their move against you. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you directly, but by the time I realized how deep this corruption went, they were already watching my every communication. Know that none of this is your fault. You built something beautiful, and parasites infiltrated it." Seth remained silent, giving her space to read. He moved to the coffee maker, began preparing a pot more out of habit than need. The familiar ritual was grounding, a small piece of normalcy in an increasingly surreal night. Ella continued reading, her eyes scanning faster as the full scope of Reggie's discoveries became clear. He documented everything. The initial safety violations that led to your wife's death, the board's decision to cover it up, the pattern of similar incidents at 3 other Apex facilities, the technology theft, the offshore accounts, the systematic looting of company resources. She looked up at Seth. "This goes back 7 years. They've been doing this since before I brought Alec on board. Alec was recruited specifically for this," Seth said, pouring 2 cups of coffee despite neither of them asking. Reggie traced his employment back to a consulting firm that specializes in corporate restructuring, which is a polite term for hostile takeovers. Alec's real job was to infiltrate Apex, gain your trust, and position himself to seize control when the time was right. Ella felt her worldview shattering with each revelation. Alec had been her protege, her trusted second. She'd promoted him, mentored him, brought him into her inner circle. How did I not see it? "Because he's exceptionally good at his job," Seth said without judgment. Corporate infiltration at this level requires years of sustained deception. He studied you, learned what you valued, became exactly the person you needed him to be. It's not a failure of your instincts, Ella. It's sophisticated, psychological manipulation. She appreciated that he didn't offer platitudes, that he treated her intelligence with respect even while delivering devastating news. Ella returned to the letter, reading Reggie's final paragraphs. He says the key to everything is something called Project Archway, that if you can prove what Archway really is, the whole conspiracy collapses. Seth nodded, his expression grim. Project Archway is what Alec's really after. It's not just about framing you or stealing the Sentinel AI. Those are means to an end. He pulled out one of the hard drives, connected it to a laptop that looked distinctly out of place in the shabby break room, its specifications clearly high-end despite the scuffed exterior. As the system loaded, Seth explained, "Officially, Project Archway is Apex's initiative to develop ethical AI guidelines, a public relations effort to show corporate responsibility. Reggie discovered that's a cover story. The real Project Archway is a backdoor system built into every piece of security software Apex has sold for the past 4 years. Ella's blood ran cold. A backdoor? We've sold security systems to hospitals, financial institutions, government agencies. Exactly. Seth pulled up files, showing lines of code that Ella recognized as deeply concerning. Every system has a hidden access point. Reggie found documentation showing the board has been selling these access codes to the highest bidder. Corporations spying on competitors, governments bypassing privacy protections, criminals accessing supposedly secure networks. Apex has been enabling digital surveillance and theft on a global scale while publicly championing cybersecurity. The implications were staggering. If this becomes public, Apex doesn't just face criminal charges. We face international sanctions, lawsuits from every client, complete corporate collapse. Which is why they need you gone before anyone starts investigating, Seth said. With you arrested for espionage, they can claim you created the back doors, that you were the criminal mastermind. Alex steps in as the hero who discovered your crimes, and the board quietly continues their operation under new branding. Ella sank onto the battered couch, the coffee forgotten. Everything she'd built, every innovation she'd championed, had been corrupted into something monstrous. How many people know about this? According to Reggie's files, the entire board of directors, Alec, and about 6 key personnel in various departments who've been placed strategically. Everyone else at Apex is innocent, including you. They kept the conspiracy small to minimize risk. We have to expose this, Ella said. But even as the words left her mouth, she recognized the challenge. But if we just release Reggie's evidence, they'll say it's fabricated. They control the narrative right now. I'm the CEO accused of espionage, and you're a former employee with a grudge. Seth smiled slightly, the first hint of humor she'd seen from him. Which is why Reggie was brilliant. He didn't just collect evidence of what they did. He created insurance that forces them to admit the truth. He navigated to another folder, opened a video file. Reggie's face appeared on the screen, looking exhausted but determined, clearly recorded shortly before his death. Ella, Seth, if you're watching this together, then the worst has happened. But I've prepared for it. Everything you need is on these drives. But more importantly, I've created a dead man's switch. On screen, Reggie explained his final safeguard. He'd programmed a system that monitored his vital signs through a medical device. If his heart stopped and wasn't reactivated within 72 hours, an automated process would begin distributing his evidence files to every major news organization, regulatory agency, and law enforcement office in the country. The board had kept him alive as long as possible after his actual heart attack, scrambling to find and disable his system. But they'd failed. The files went out 5 months and 3 weeks ago. Reggie's recorded voice continued. But I built in a delay, gave them time to be received and verified, but not published. I wanted to see if they'd do the right thing if faced with inevitable exposure. They didn't. Instead, they accelerated their plans, which means by the time you watch this, they're in too deep to back out. Every move they make now is being documented by people I've already briefed. Your job isn't to expose them, Ella. It's to survive long enough for the exposure to happen on schedule. The video ended. Ella and Seth sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what Reggie had orchestrated. He'd turned his own death into a trap, one that gave them time to prepare while the conspiracy tightened around itself. When? Ella finally asked. When do the files go public? Seth checked his watch. According to Reggie's timeline, in approximately 48 hours, every news organization that received his files has been independently verifying them. Once they're ready, it all breaks at once, coordinated for maximum impact and minimum chance of suppression. So we just need to stay alive and free for 2 more days, Ella said, the task sounding simultaneously simple and impossible. And prove you're not fleeing justice, Seth added. If you disappear completely, they'll use that as evidence of guilt. We need to stay visible but protected. Let them make mistakes while we document everything. Reggie's files prove the historical conspiracy, but we need real-time evidence of the current crimes, the active framing, the hostage situation. Ella stood, pacing the small room. Her mind was already working through strategies, calculating risks and opportunities. My assistant, Chloe Martinez, she's smart and loyal. If we can get to her, she has access to my calendars and communications. She can provide alibis for the times they claim I was conducting espionage. Reggie's files mention her, Seth confirmed. He vetted several people at Apex, identified who could be trusted. Chloe was on that list. We'll need legal representation, Ella continued, building momentum. Someone outside Apex's usual firms, and media contacts who won't just report Alex's version of events. Seth nodded, impressed by her ability to pivot from shock to action. Reggie left contact information for a lawyer named Ashton Walsh, works with corporate whistleblowers, and a journalist, Edith Walsh. She's been investigating corporate corruption for years. Walsh and Walsh, Ella noted. Related? Siblings. They've taken down 3 major corporations in the past decade. Reggie reached out to them months ago, gave them preliminary information. They've been waiting for the full story. Ella felt hope rekindling. Not the naive optimism she'd had before tonight, but something harder and more resilient. Then we have 48 hours to build a counter-narrative, to document what's really happening, and to make sure that when Reggie's evidence goes public, there's no way for them to spin it. She looked at Seth, really seeing him for the first time. Not just the janitor who'd saved her, but the father who'd sacrificed his career to protect his daughter, the engineer who'd been systematically destroyed for seeking truth, the man who'd spent 4 years preparing for this moment. Why now? You could have waited, let this play out without putting yourself at risk again. Seth met her gaze, and Ella saw in his eyes the same determination that had driven her to build Apex in the first place. The refusal to accept injustice, even when fighting it, came at tremendous personal cost. Because Zoe asked me last week why I stopped being an engineer. She's 7, starting to understand that her father does work that people don't respect. And I realized that if I let you go down without fighting, I'd be teaching her that survival is more important than standing up for what's right. He paused, then added quietly, Leela would never forgive me for that lesson, and neither would I. Seth opened the laptop fully, pulling up the comprehensive archive that Reggie Bishop had spent 2 years compiling. The screen filled with folders, each meticulously labeled and dated. A digital paper trail that represented countless hours of secret investigation and personal risk. Ella moved closer, watching as Seth navigated through the files with practiced familiarity. Reggie organized everything chronologically and by category, Seth explained, opening a folder marked Foundation Corruption 2018 to 2020. The screen displayed dozens of subfolders. He wanted anyone who accessed this to understand not just what happened, but how it evolved. This wasn't sudden corruption. It was systematic, planned, and executed over years. The first file Seth opened was a video recording, clearly taken secretly during a board meeting. The timestamp showed it was from 6 years ago, shortly after Apex had secured its first major government contract. Ella recognized the conference room, recognized the faces around the table. She'd been traveling that week, meeting with potential investors in Singapore, missing what turned out to be a pivotal moment in her company's dark transformation. Alec Jennings appeared on screen, younger but already possessing the calculated charisma that had made him so effective. The Sentinel AI platform gives us unprecedented access, his recorded voice explained to the assembled board members. Every security system we install, every update we push, can include features that clients don't know about. Monitoring capabilities, data collection, access backdoors. The technology exists. The question is whether we're willing to monetize it. Ella felt nauseous watching the man she'd trusted lay out a blueprint for corporate betrayal. On screen, board members asked questions about legal liability, about detection risks, about profit potential. No one asked whether it was ethical. No one suggested it might be wrong. This recording alone proves conspiracy, Ella said, her voice tight with anger. They're explicitly discussing illegal surveillance capabilities. It gets worse. Seth advanced to another file, this one showing financial records. Here's where it becomes clear this wasn't just theoretical. 3 months after that meeting, Apex signed a contract with a shell company called Frontier Analytics. Officially, they were consultants helping optimize our AI algorithms. In reality, they were brokers. He pulled up transaction records showing money flowing from Frontier Analytics to Apex, then traced the shell company's ownership through 6 layers of corporate obfuscation until it connected to a network of organizations specializing in corporate espionage and government surveillance. They weren't paying us for consulting. They were paying us for access codes. Reggie documented 47 separate transactions over 3 years, totaling $83 million. Ella scrolled through the records, each transaction representing another compromise of client trust, another violation of the principles she'd built Apex on. Hospitals whose patient data was supposedly secure, financial institutions whose customer information was meant to be protected, government agencies whose communications were considered classified. All of them had been purchasing security from a company that was simultaneously selling keys to that security. How did Reggie get all of this? Ella asked. The board would have kept these transactions heavily encrypted. Reggie was smarter than they gave him credit for, Seth said with evident respect. He never tried to hack their systems directly. Instead, he set up monitoring on the network infrastructure itself, watching traffic patterns and data flows. When he noticed anomalous communications between Alec's computer and external servers, he started logging everything. It took him 9 months to decrypt the communications, but once he did, the whole operation was exposed. Seth opened another folder, this one containing audio files. These are recordings Reggie made using the building's own security system. He gained access through maintenance protocols that no one thought to secure because they assumed maintenance staff wouldn't understand their significance. He played one file, dated 8 months ago. Alec's voice came through clearly, speaking with someone Ella didn't recognize. The Bishop problem needs to be resolved. He knows too much, and he's not responding to pressure. Make it look natural. Heart attack, stroke, something that won't trigger investigation. Ella's hands clenched into fists. They're discussing murdering Reggie. This is evidence of premeditated homicide. There are 4 more recordings like this, Seth said grimly. Different board members, different conversations, but all discussing the same objective. When Reggie's heart stopped at his desk, it wasn't because of natural causes. Reggie suspected they'd try something, so he'd started wearing a medical monitoring device that recorded his vital signs. The data shows his heart was functioning normally, then suddenly went into arrhythmia inconsistent with natural cardiac failure. He pulled up medical data that meant little to Ella, but which Seth interpreted with the knowledge of someone who'd researched thoroughly. The pattern matches induced cardiac arrest, likely from a substance that metabolizes quickly and doesn't show up in standard toxicology screens. Reggie died knowing he'd been poisoned, but he also died knowing his death would trigger the evidence release that would expose everything. The calculated cruelty of it stunned Ella. Reggie had been her friend, her partner in building something she'd believed was making the world better. And he'd been murdered in his own office, surrounded by people who'd watched him die and then returned to their work as if nothing had happened. "There's more," Seth said, opening yet another folder. "Reggie documented your framing before it even started. 6 weeks ago, he intercepted communications between Alec and the board discussing when to move against you. They were waiting for the right opportunity, something public enough to seem legitimate, but controlled enough to manage the narrative. The files showed planning documents, drafted press releases prepared weeks in advance, legal strategies for handling the fallout. They'd choreographed tonight's hostage situation like a theatrical performance, timing it for maximum employee exposure, ensuring cameras captured everything, crafting the story of a corrupt CEO caught in the act. They chose tonight because you were scheduled to present the quarterly earnings report tomorrow," Seth explained. "Strong profits, positive growth projections. They wanted to arrest you at the peak of apparent success, make the betrayal seem more dramatic. The contrast between your public success and secret criminality would make the story more compelling." Ella saw the psychological manipulation clearly now. The timing, the public setting, the careful construction of evidence, all of it designed not just to remove her from power, but to destroy her completely, to make her a cautionary tale about corporate greed and betrayal. Reggie anticipated all of this, Seth said, returning to the main menu. That's what makes his archive so powerful. He didn't just document past crimes, he predicted future ones and left instructions for countering them. There's a file here specifically labeled, "When They Come for Ella." He opened it, revealing a detailed action plan. Contact lists for trusted allies, legal strategies for fighting false charges, media talking points for controlling the narrative, and most importantly, evidence that directly contradicted every accusation they'd make against her. Reggie compiled your calendar records, cross-referenced them with the times Alec claims you were conducting espionage, Seth explained, pulling up synchronized timelines. Every instance where they say you were stealing technology, Reggie has proof you were somewhere else. Video footage, email timestamps, meeting minutes. He built you an alibi for crimes you didn't commit. But perhaps most damning was the file marked "Real Thief." Seth opened it to reveal surveillance footage he'd pulled from Apex's own security cameras, showing Alec Jennings physically accessing Ella's office when she was traveling, using her computer, transferring files to external drives. The timestamps matched exactly with the instances of alleged espionage. Reggie didn't just prove you're innocent, Seth said. He proved who the actual criminal is, with video evidence that can't be disputed. Every crime they're accusing you of, Reggie documented Alec committing it while wearing your digital identity. Ella watched the surveillance footage, seeing her own office violated, her own credentials stolen, her own reputation weaponized against her. The violation was profound, but so was the gratitude she felt toward Reggie for his foresight and preparation. "There's one more thing," Seth said, his tone becoming even more serious. He opened a final file, this one marked "Contingency." It contained a video message from Reggie, clearly recorded shortly before his death, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who knew time was running out. "Ella Seth," Reggie's recorded image began. If you're viewing this, then everything I feared has happened. They've killed me, and they've moved against Ella. But I've prepared one final safeguard, something they don't know about and can't stop. On screen, Reggie explained his masterstroke. When he'd set up the automated evidence distribution system, he'd also created a parallel system that monitored Apex's own networks. If anyone attempted to access, modify, or delete the evidence files from Apex's servers, the system would automatically accelerate the public release timeline. They'll try to find and destroy the evidence. Reggie's recording continued. That's human nature when cornered. But the moment they start searching Apex's systems for these files, they'll trigger the early release. Everything goes public immediately, to everyone, with an explanation of why it was released early. Their attempt to suppress the truth becomes proof of their guilt. The video showed Reggie's sad smile. I've turned their own desperation into a trap. If they do nothing, the evidence releases in 48 hours. If they try to stop it, it releases immediately. Either way, the truth comes out. Your job is to survive until it does, and to make sure you're positioned to tell your side of the story when it happens. The recording ended, and Seth closed the laptop. The basement room felt smaller somehow, weighted with the magnitude of what Reggie had accomplished in his final months. He'd created an unwinnable scenario for the conspirators, a checkmate that couldn't be avoided regardless of their next moves. We need to secure copies of all this, Ella said, her strategic mind already working through next steps. If something happens to these drives, if they manage to find us, already done, Seth assured her. Reggie taught me his backup protocols. There are encrypted copies stored in 7 different locations, including 3 that are automatically updated from these source files. Even if they destroy this entire archive, the information survives. Ella stood, pacing the small room as she processed everything. So our objective is straightforward. Stay alive and free for 48 hours. Document any additional crimes they commit while hunting us, and be ready to provide context when Reggie's evidence goes public. Straightforward in concept, Seth agreed. Complicated in execution. Alec knows the building better than almost anyone. He controls security, and he has resources we don't. Plus, your face is all over the news right now. Every employee, every security guard, every person in Harborview has seen you accused of espionage. Staying hidden while staying visible enough to matter is going to require careful planning. 20 minutes later, Seth and Ella emerged from the service basement into the main lobby of Apex Technologies. And immediately, the atmosphere changed. The space that had been empty when they descended was now crowded with employees who'd been called back after the hostage situation ended, briefed on the fugitive CEO who'd escaped custody, and encouraged to be vigilant. The moment Ella stepped into view, recognition rippled through the crowd like an electric current. "That's her," someone shouted, and suddenly dozens of phones were raised, cameras capturing every angle. Seth had anticipated this. Before they'd left the basement, he'd given Ella a simple instruction that went against every instinct of someone used to controlling corporate narratives. Don't hide. Don't run. Walk through them with your head up. Let them see you're not afraid. But theory and practice were vastly different. As employees surrounded them, the hostility was palpable. These were people who'd believed in Ella, who'd worked late nights to meet her ambitious goals, who'd defended Apex's reputation at industry conferences and family dinners. And in their minds, she'd betrayed all of it. A junior software developer, someone Ella had personally recruited from a university job fair, stepped directly into her path. How could you? The young woman's voice cracked with genuine hurt. I turned down offers from 3 other companies because I believed in your vision. I believed Apex was different. Ella met her eyes, refusing to look away from the pain she saw there. "Chloe, I know what you've been told. I know how it looks. But I need you to trust that the truth is more complicated than tonight's presentation suggested." "Trust you?" Another voice, male, angry. "You stole from us. You sold our work to competitors. You're everything wrong with corporate America." The crowd pressed closer, not physically threatening, but emotionally overwhelming. Seth positioned himself slightly in front of Ella, not blocking her, but creating a buffer. His phone was out, recording everything, documenting the scene for later use. If Reggie's evidence proved effective, this footage would show how thoroughly the narrative had been manipulated, how completely Alec had turned Apex's culture against its founder. A security monitor on the lobby wall showed live news coverage, and Ella saw her own face displayed with the caption, "Tech CEO flees after espionage accusations." The reporter's voice echoed through the lobby speakers. Ella White, who just hours ago was being held for questioning about alleged corporate espionage, has escaped from Apex Technologies' headquarters. Authorities are coordinating with company security to locate her. The irony was almost laughable. She'd been held hostage by her own security team, and now the news was portraying her escape as evidence of guilt. The narrative inversion was masterful, and Ella recognized Alec's work in every carefully chosen word. "Miss White," a voice cut through the crowd, and Ella saw Chloe Martinez, her executive assistant, pushing through the employees. Chloe's face showed confusion rather than anger, uncertainty rather than conviction. "What's happening? Mr. Jennings said you'd been caught stealing proprietary data, but none of this makes sense." Seth caught Ella's eye, a subtle nod. Chloe was one of the people Reggie had identified as trustworthy, someone who could be brought into their confidence. But this wasn't the place for that conversation. Not with dozens of cameras recording and security teams mobilizing. "Chloe, I need you to trust me," Ella said quietly. "Check my calendar for the past 6 months. Cross-reference it with the times they're claiming I accessed secure servers. You'll find discrepancies. But more importantly, I need you to secure my personal files from my office before anyone else can access them." Understanding flickered in Chloe's eyes. As an executive assistant, she knew how to read between lines, how to understand unstated instructions. "The encrypted drive in your desk drawer? Everything on it. And Chloe, be careful. The people behind this won't hesitate to implicate anyone who helps me." Before Chloe could respond, the lobby's main elevators opened, and Alec Jennings emerged with a contingent of security personnel. His expression when he saw Ella was a carefully calibrated mixture of shock and concern. The performance of a devoted colleague confronted with betrayal. But Ella saw something else in his eyes. Calculation and barely suppressed fury that his plan had been disrupted. "Ella," Alec's voice carried across the lobby, amplified by the excellent acoustics that had been part of the building's award-winning design. "Please, don't make this worse. If you cooperate now, if you explain what happened, we can work through this." The gathered employees parted, creating a clear path between them. It felt theatrical, staged, like a confrontation from a television drama. Which, Ella realized, was exactly the point. Every phone was recording, every employee was a witness. Whatever happened next would be shared thousands of times across social media, analyzed and debated and used to cement whatever narrative proved most compelling. "You mean cooperate the way you cooperated with Reggie Bishop?" Ella's voice was steady, clear. "The way you cooperated with my company's actual interests instead of your own financial gain?" Alec's expression flickered, just for a moment, before the mask of concern returned. I understand you're stressed. The accusations are serious and you're frightened. But making wild claims about Reggie, who tragically passed away, isn't going to help your situation. Reggie didn't tragically pass away. Seth spoke up, his janitor's uniform making his intervention seem incongruous to the watching employees. He was murdered because he discovered what you've been doing. And before he died, he documented everything. The crowd's attention shifted to Seth, seeing him for the first time as something more than incidental presence. Alec's gaze sharpened, recognition and assessment happening simultaneously. Seth Newman, I remember you. Didn't you resign after some incident with your wife? Mental health issues, if I recall. It was a calculated attack, an attempt to undermine Seth's credibility by invoking trauma and implying instability. But Seth had spent 4 years preparing for moments like this, learning to control his emotional responses, to channel grief into purpose rather than vulnerability. I resigned after my wife was killed in a fire caused by safety violations that Apex covered up. Seth corrected, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Violations that Reggie discovered were part of a systematic pattern of negligence and fraud. And I've spent the past 4 years ensuring that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. Alec took a step forward, and the security personnel moved with him, a subtle show of force. This is a regrettable situation made worse by conspiracy theories and paranoid accusations. Ella, I'm asking you one final time to surrender peacefully. If you refuse, security will be forced to detain you, and that process might not be comfortable. It was a threat wrapped in professional courtesy, and the employees heard it clearly. The crowd's mood was shifting, uncertainty creeping in, as they witnessed something that didn't match the simple story they'd been told. Stolen data and corporate espionage should be straightforward, but this confrontation had layers that suggested deeper complexities. Seth's phone buzzed with an alert. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed. Ella, we need to move. Now. She trusted his judgment without question. They'd formed a partnership in crisis, the kind of alliance that required faith without explanation. As they turned toward the building's west exit, security moved to block them. Don't let them leave, Alec commanded, his composure finally cracking. Stop them. The security guards advanced. But they were corporate security, trained for access control and emergency response, not for forcefully restraining a CEO who'd built the company. Their hesitation was visible. Uncertainty about whether following orders would later be judged as aiding a conspiracy or preventing a criminal's escape. Seth used that hesitation. He grabbed Ella's hand and moved toward the west corridor, not running, but walking with determined purpose. The crowd parted instinctively, and by the time security mobilized to follow, Seth had led them through a service door that most employees didn't know existed. The door closed behind them, and Seth immediately jammed a maintenance cart against it, buying precious seconds. They were in another service corridor, this one leading to the building's parking structure. Behind them, the sound of security trying to breach the door echoed in the narrow space. What was the alert? Ella asked as they moved quickly through the corridor. Someone in Apex's IT department just initiated a search of the entire network for files matching Reggie's naming conventions, Seth explained. They're looking for the evidence, which means in approximately 3 minutes, they're going to trigger the accelerated release protocol. Ella understood immediately. Reggie's trap is springing. The evidence will go public early, which changes our timeline dramatically, Seth confirmed. We don't have 48 hours anymore. We have whatever time it takes for news organizations to verify the files and start publishing. Could be 3 hours, could be 30 minutes. They reached the parking structure, emerging into the concrete expanse filled with employee vehicles. Seth led her toward a section marked for maintenance vehicles, where his own car was parked, a 15-year-old sedan that had seen better days, but which Seth maintained with mechanical precision. "Get in," he instructed, and Ella complied without question. As Seth started the engine, security burst into the parking structure, shouting for them to stop. But Seth had already calculated angles and exit routes, had spent 4 years learning every detail of this building's infrastructure. He drove toward a lower-level exit that bypassed the main security checkpoints, an oversight in the building's design that he'd never reported because some part of him had always known he might need it. They emerged from the Apex parking structure onto the streets of Harborview, the city's downtown district still busy despite the late hour. Seth drove carefully, maintaining speed limits and traffic laws, knowing that drawing attention now would be catastrophic. In the passenger seat, Ella was silent, processing the enormity of what had just happened, what was about to happen. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Somewhere they won't think to look," Seth replied. "Somewhere that represents everything Alec assumes I'd avoid." He drove through the city, navigating away from the corporate district toward residential neighborhoods, where the architecture shifted from steel and glass to brick and wood. After 20 minutes, Seth pulled into the parking lot of a modest apartment complex called Thornhill Gardens, the kind of place where working families lived, where playgrounds had weathered equipment and laundry hung on balconies. "This is home," Seth said simply, parking in a numbered space. They climbed 2 flights of external stairs to apartment 214, and Seth paused before unlocking the door. "I need to prepare you for something. My daughter Zoe, she's inside with my sister, and she's going to have questions." The vulnerability in his voice reminded Ella that Seth wasn't just a brilliant engineer or a strategic ally. He was a father, and everything he'd done tonight had carried the risk of orphaning his daughter the same way Lila's death had almost orphaned her. Seth opened the door, and immediately a small figure launched herself from the couch. "Daddy." Zoe was 7 years old, with dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail and her father's intense eyes. She wore pajamas covered in stars, and she clutched a stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen years of devoted companionship. A woman in her mid-30s appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. The family resemblance to Seth was clear, same cheekbones, same direct gaze. "Seth, what's going on? The news is saying there's some situation at Apex, and they're showing pictures of—" She stopped as she saw Ella. "Ashton, this is Ella White," Seth said, scooping his daughter into a hug. "Ella, my sister, Ashton Walsh." Ella recognized the name immediately. "The corporate attorney Reggie contacted." Ashton's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "So, it's happening. Reggie's evidence is going active." "Earlier than planned," Seth confirmed. "They triggered the accelerated release protocol about 15 minutes ago. Every news organization that received Reggie's files is about to start verifying and publishing." Zoe looked between the adults, her young face showing concern that no 7-year-old should have to feel. "Daddy, are you in trouble again? Like before?" The question broke something in Ella's heart. This little girl had already learned that her father sometimes had to fight battles that put him at risk, had already experienced loss profound enough to make her afraid of losing more. Seth knelt down to Zoe's level, setting her on his knee. "I'm not in trouble, sweetheart, but I am helping someone who is. And that means things might be complicated for a few days. But Aunt Ashton is here, and you're safe, and I promise I'm being careful." Like you promised Mommy you'd be careful? Zoe's voice was small, and Ella saw Seth's composure waver. Yeah, baby. Like I promised Mommy. Ashton intervened gently, recognizing her brother needed a moment. Zoe, how about you show me if you finished that math homework? I bet you got all the problems right. But let's check together. Zoe hesitated, clearly wanting to stay with her father, but finally nodded and took Ashton's hand. As they moved to the small dining table, Ella saw the careful balance Seth's family had created, the way they protected Zoe while also preparing her for a reality where sometimes good people had to do difficult things. The apartment was modest, but clearly a home. Drawings covered the refrigerator, a bookshelf overflowed with both engineering texts and picture books, and photos lined the walls showing Seth's life in layers. His wedding day, Lila vibrant and laughing. The three of them when Zoe was an infant. More recent photos where Zoe smiled, but Seth's eyes held lingering sadness. I'm sorry, Ella said quietly. I'm sorry that helping me puts your family at risk again. Seth shook his head. Zoe asked me last week what I used to do before I was a janitor. I started to give her the easy answer, but then I realized she deserves the truth. She deserves to see that sometimes you have to stand up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He moved to the kitchen, started making tea with the automatic movements of routine. After Lila died, I thought keeping Zoe safe meant avoiding everything associated with Apex, with corporate power, with the systems that had destroyed us. I took the janitorial job because it was invisible, because it let me disappear. But you didn't disappear, Ella observed. You positioned yourself exactly where you needed to be. I told myself I was just surviving, Seth said, pouring hot water into mugs. But part of me, the part that Lila loved, the part that became an engineer because I wanted to solve problems and protect people, that part was waiting. Reggie knew that about me. That's why he trusted me with his evidence. At the dining table, Zoe was showing Ashton her homework, her young voice explaining multiplication with earnest concentration. The normalcy of it, the simple beauty of a family moment, stood in stark contrast to the conspiracy they were fighting. Ashton joined them in the kitchen, keeping her voice low. I've been monitoring news feeds. 3 major outlets just published breaking stories about Apex Technologies. They're all citing anonymous sources and leaked documents about systematic fraud and surveillance operations. Reggie's files, Seth confirmed. Once they started verifying, it must have moved faster than expected. Your face is all over the news, Ella, Ashton continued. But the narrative is shifting. Instead of fugitive CEO, it's becoming whistleblower CEO targeted by conspiracy. The hostage situation is being reframed as false imprisonment. Ella felt cautiously hopeful. How long before the full story breaks? Hours, maybe less. But here's the complicated part. Alec Jennings just gave an interview claiming you orchestrated this entire scenario. He's saying you leaked fabricated documents to create reasonable doubt that you're running a sophisticated disinformation campaign. Of course he is, Seth said without surprise. He's trying to muddy the waters before the evidence becomes overwhelming. Ashton pulled up her tablet, showing them the interview. Alec appeared composed and concerned, speaking with practiced sincerity. Ella White is brilliant, which makes her dangerous when cornered. These documents that are surfacing, they're elaborate forgeries designed to confuse the real evidence of her crimes. We anticipated this strategy, which is why we've been working with federal investigators to verify the authentic records. It was masterful manipulation, preemptively discrediting the truth by framing it as expected deception. Anyone who wanted to doubt Reggie's evidence now had permission to do so, could point to Alec's warning about sophisticated forgeries. "We need to counter that immediately," Ella said, but Ashton was already nodding. "My sister Edith is on her way here. She's been investigating Apex for months, and she has contacts at every major outlet. Once she interviews you directly, once she can verify you're coherent and credible and not some fugitive mastermind, the narrative shifts again." From the dining table, Zoe called out, "Daddy, can Miss Ella stay for dinner? She looks hungry." The innocent observation broke the tension, reminding them that despite corporate conspiracies and media wars, basic human needs remained. Ella realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast, that her body was running on adrenaline and determination. Seth smiled at his daughter, the first genuine smile Ella had seen from him. "I think that's a great idea, sweetheart. What should we make?" "Grilled cheese and tomato soup," Zoe declared with the absolute certainty of someone stating universal truth. "It's the best dinner for when people are sad or worried." Ella found herself laughing, the sound surprising after the intensity of the night. "You know what, Zoe? I think you're absolutely right." As Seth moved to prepare the simple meal, Ashton continued planning their legal strategy, and Zoe returned to her homework with occasional glances to make sure her father was still there. The scene had a surreal quality. Fugitive CEO and whistleblowing janitor preparing grilled cheese while international corporate fraud was exposed in real time. But it also felt profoundly right. This was what Reggie had been fighting for, Ella realized. Not just exposing corruption or punishing criminals, but protecting moments like this. Protecting families who deserve to live without fear that their pursuit of truth would destroy them. Protecting the principle that doing right should not require sacrificing everything. Zoe came over to Ella, studying her with the frank curiosity of someone too young to be impressed by titles or reputations. "Are you friends with my daddy now?" "I think so," Ella said carefully. "He helped me when I really needed it." "That's what Daddy does," Zoe said matter-of-factly. "He helps people even when it's hard. Mommy used to say, he had a hero heart." Her small face clouded. "But sometimes heroes get hurt. So you have to be careful too, okay? Because Daddy would be sad if you got hurt helping him." The simple wisdom of it, the way this little girl had learned to worry about people who fought alongside her father, made Ella understand the true cost of Seth's choices. He hadn't just risked his career or his freedom. He'd risked teaching his daughter that love meant loss, that standing up meant getting hurt. "I promise to be careful," Ella told her, "and I promise to help keep your daddy safe too." Zoe considered this, then nodded, satisfied. "Okay. Do you like stuffed animals? Mr. Carrots is a very good listener if you need to tell him your worries." She offered her well-loved rabbit to Ella with complete sincerity. Ella accepted the rabbit carefully, recognizing the gift for what it was. A 7-year-old's most valuable offering, the comfort she herself used when frightened. "Thank you, Zoe. I'll take very good care of him." As they sat down to simple grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, as Ashton fielded phone calls from journalists, and Seth explained to his daughter in age-appropriate terms what was happening, Ella felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope or determination, but belonging. She was being welcomed into this small, resilient family at their moment of greatest vulnerability. Trusted not because of her corporate success, but because she'd proven willing to fight alongside someone who had already sacrificed everything. The news played on mute on the apartment's small television, showing Apex's headquarters surrounded by news vans and federal investigators. Somewhere in that building, Alec Jennings was watching his conspiracy collapse in real time. But here, in apartment 214 of Thornhill Gardens, 3 adults and 1 remarkably wise 7-year-old were sharing soup and planning how to tell a truth that could not be suppressed. It was, Ella thought, exactly the kind of scene that Reggie would have wanted to protect. An hour later, Edith Walsh arrived at the apartment with recording equipment and the focused intensity of an investigative journalist who'd spent years preparing for exactly this kind of story. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and an economy of movement that suggested someone who didn't waste time on pleasantries when truth needed documenting. "Ella White," Edith said, setting up a camera on a tripod. "I've been investigating Apex Technologies for 8 months. Reggie Bishop sent me preliminary files, enough to know something was deeply wrong, but not enough to publish without risking libel suits. Now those files are going viral, and I need your testimony on record before Alec Jennings' narrative becomes the accepted version of events." Ella sat in Seth's modest living room, acutely aware that this interview would likely define public perception of everything that had happened. Zoe had been put to bed in the next room, but Ella could hear the little girl's occasional questions to Ashton about why reporters needed to talk to her daddy's friend. "Before we start," Ella said, "I need to understand what's already public. What has Reggie's evidence revealed?" Edith pulled up her tablet, showing headlines from major news outlets. Financial records proving systematic fraud, audio recordings of board members discussing illegal surveillance operations, and documented communications showing premeditated conspiracy. 3 board members have already been taken into federal custody. Stock trading has been suspended. The FBI has opened a full investigation. And Alec? Still maintaining his innocence, claiming the evidence is fabricated, and positioning himself as the whistleblower who discovered your supposed crimes. He's doing interviews from Apex headquarters, surrounded by lawyers and security, presenting himself as the last honest person in a corrupt organization. Edith's expression showed what she thought of that performance. "Which is why I need your testimony. I need the human story behind the data, the personal narrative that makes this real for people." The interview lasted 90 minutes. Edith asked detailed questions about Apex's founding, about Ella's relationship with Reggie, about when she first suspected something was wrong. Ella spoke carefully but honestly, aware that every word would be analyzed and potentially used against her. But she also recognized an opportunity to reclaim her narrative, to transform from accused criminal to targeted whistleblower. "Reggie Bishop died trying to expose this conspiracy," Ella said directly to the camera. "He spent 2 years documenting crimes while pretending to be complicit, knowing that the evidence he gathered might only become public after his death. That's not the action of someone involved in corruption. That's heroism of the highest order." "And Seth Newman?" Edith asked, her camera panning slightly to where Seth stood in the kitchen, maintaining distance from the interview but close enough to provide support. How does a night shift janitor become central to exposing corporate fraud? Ella looked at Seth, seeing not just the man who'd saved her, but the father who'd sacrificed his career to protect his daughter, the engineer who'd maintained his integrity even when it cost him everything. Seth isn't a janitor. He's a brilliant cybersecurity expert who was destroyed by the same people who tried to destroy me. They killed his wife, ruined his reputation, and forced him into obscurity. But he never stopped fighting. He never stopped preparing for the moment when truth could triumph over power. Seth met her gaze across the room, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, respect, and the beginning of something deeper that neither was ready to name, but both could feel. The interview concluded just after midnight. Edith packed her equipment efficiently, promising the segment would air. within hours on multiple networks simultaneously. Alec Jennings has powerful allies, she warned. But he's never faced someone like you, Ella. Someone who built the company he's trying to steal, who understands its systems better than he does, and who has nothing left to lose. After Edith left, the apartment settled into uneasy quiet. Ashton had gone to her own home, promising to return first thing in the morning with legal documents. Seth checked on Zoe, finding her asleep with Mr. Carrots clutched tight, her small face peaceful in a way that made clear how much she'd needed this security. Ella stood by the window, looking out at Harborview's lights. Somewhere in that sprawl, Alec was planning his next move. The board was coordinating with lawyers, and federal investigators were building cases. The machinery of justice was grinding forward, but slowly, with uncertainty about where it would ultimately lead. "You should try to sleep," Seth said, joining her at the window. "Tomorrow is going to be intense, and you need rest." "I don't know if I can," Ella admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that boardroom. I see 6 hours of my life where I had no control, where people I trusted were destroying everything I'd built." Seth nodded, understanding. "After Lila died, I couldn't sleep for months. Every time I tried, I'd relive the moment I got the call about the fire. The panic of driving to the hospital. The way the doctors' faces told me everything before their words did." "How did you survive it?" Ella asked quietly. "Zoe," Seth said simply. "Every morning she needed breakfast, needed help getting dressed, needed a parent who could function. So I functioned. I pushed the grief down and focused on the immediate tasks. Eventually, the tasks became routine, and the routine became life again. Not the life I'd planned, but a life worth living." Ella turned to face him fully. "You could have destroyed Apex years ago. You had cause, you had capability. Why didn't you?" "Because destruction without purpose is just revenge," Seth said. "I wanted justice, which is different. Justice required patience, required evidence, required waiting for the right moment when truth could be undeniable. Reggie understood that. That's why we worked together, why he trusted me with his evidence." "Tell me about him," Ella requested. "Tell me about the Reggie you knew, not the CTO I worked with, but your friend." Seth smiled slightly, memories softening his features. Reggie was obsessively careful about documentation. He kept spreadsheets tracking household expenses down to individual grocery items. Drove his wife crazy. But that same precision made him see patterns other people missed. He'd notice when numbers didn't align, when stories didn't match reality. He moved to the couch, and Ella joined him, both sitting in the dimness with only the city lights for illumination. When Lila died, Rigi was the only executive who came to the funeral. Not the public, memorial service Apex held for appearances, but the actual funeral where her family buried her. He stood with me in the rain and said, "Something about this doesn't feel right. Let me look into it." "That must have meant everything to you," Ella said. "It meant I wasn't alone in thinking her death wasn't just tragedy, but crime. It meant someone with access and authority believed me. But then I watched what happened to him, how the board slowly corrupted him through promotions and access, how they made him complicit in smaller crimes before revealing the larger conspiracy. He hated himself for not resisting more, for playing along even as he gathered evidence." Seth pulled out his phone, navigated to a video file he hadn't shown Ella yet. "Reggie left this message specifically for you, recorded the day before he died. I've watched it maybe 50 times, but I think you need to see it." He played the video, and Reggie's face appeared on the small screen. He looked exhausted, older than his 41 years, but his eyes held fierce determination. Ella, if you're watching this with Seth, then I'm dead, and they've made their move against you. I need you to know something important. Everything I did, every compromise I made, was to get close enough to document the full scope of their crimes. I became complicit to become effective. Reggie's recorded image leaned closer to the camera. You're going to feel betrayed by people you trusted, confused about how you missed the signs, guilty about the harm done in your name. I felt all of that. But here's what matters. You built something real before they corrupted it. Apex started as your vision of technology serving human needs, of innovation with integrity. That vision was worth building and worth fighting for. He paused, and Ella could see him composing himself. Seth has my evidence, but he also has my friendship and my trust. Listen to him. He understands loss in ways I hope you never have to. But that understanding makes him wise about what truly matters. And Ella, when this is over, when the truth is exposed and justice is served, don't let their corruption destroy your belief in what you built. Corrupt people infiltrated something good. That doesn't make the original vision less valid. The video ended with Reggie's sad smile. Take care of each other. The fight is going to be brutal, but you're not alone in it. And that makes all the difference. Ella found tears streaming down her face. He knew. He knew exactly how this would feel. He documented the emotional landscape as carefully as he documented the crimes. Seth agreed. That's why his evidence is so powerful. It's not just data and recordings. It's a complete map of what they did, how they did it, and why people like you and me couldn't see it happening until too late. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of Reggie's sacrifice. Finally, Ella spoke. Tomorrow, when we face whatever Alec has planned, I need you to promise me something. What? Seth asked. That if it comes down to protecting me or protecting your ability to be there for Zoe, you choose Zoe. Every time, without hesitation. Seth shook his head. That's not how this works. We protect each other, which means both of us survive to see this through. Seth, be realistic. No, he interrupted firmly. I spent 4 years being realistic, being careful, being invisible. And all it got me was a front row seat to corruption winning while I stayed silent. Zoe deserves better than a father who teaches her that survival is more important than integrity. She deserves a living father, Ella countered. She deserves a father worth looking up to, Seth said. Which means fighting alongside you, not abandoning you when it gets dangerous. Lila would never forgive me if I saved myself at the expense of someone who needed help. The conviction in his voice left no room for argument. Ella recognized in him the same stubborn idealism that had driven her to build Apex. The same refusal to accept that pragmatic surrender was wisdom rather than cowardice. Okay, she finally said. We fight together. Together, Seth confirmed. In the next room, Zoe called out softly, having woken from a dream. Seth immediately went to her, and Ella heard his gentle voice soothing his daughter back to sleep, promising that everything was okay, that Daddy was right here, that she was safe. The tenderness of it, the absolute devotion in his parenting, reinforced everything Ella had learned about him tonight. When Seth returned, he looked apologetic. She has nightmares sometimes. About fires, about losing people. The therapist says it's normal for someone who experienced trauma at such a young age. How do you do it? Ella asked. Balance being a parent with fighting battles like this? Imperfectly, Seth admitted. But Zoe's taught me something important. She knows I fight for what's right, and she knows sometimes that fighting is scary. But she also knows I always come home to her. That promise, that commitment to returning, keeps me careful even when I'm being brave. You're a good father, Ella said sincerely. I'm a father who's trying, Seth corrected. Some days, that's enough. Morning arrived with the harsh reality of Ella's face on every news channel. But the narrative had shifted dramatically overnight. Instead of fugitive criminal, headlines read, Tech CEO targeted by corporate conspiracy, and whistleblower framed while exposing billion-dollar fraud. Edith Walsh's interview had aired at 3 a.m. across multiple networks, and by dawn, it had been viewed 12 million times. Ashton returned to the apartment at 7 with newspapers, legal documents, and cautiously optimistic news. The federal investigators want to interview you, Ella. Officially, as a witness rather than a suspect. Alec's narrative is collapsing faster than his lawyers can prop it up. But Seth was focused on his laptop, his expression concerned. There's a problem. Someone at Apex is systematically deleting files from the servers. They're trying to destroy evidence before investigators can secure it. Can they? Ella asked, her heart sinking. Not Reggie's external archive, Seth assured her. But there might be additional evidence on Apex's servers that wasn't in his files. Internal communications, recent documents, things created after Reggie died. If those get deleted, we lose context and potentially proof of recent crimes. Ashton looked between them. Can you access Apex's network remotely? Stop the deletion? Not remotely, Seth said. The network security I designed is too good. I'd need physical access to the server room. Which is suicide, Ella stated flatly. Security is looking for both of us. Walking into Apex headquarters would be necessary. Seth interrupted. Because Alec knows Reggie's evidence is exposing the historical conspiracy. But he thinks if he can erase recent files, he can claim he was innocent until recently. That the corruption happened under previous leadership. It's his exit strategy, and we can't let him execute it. Zoe emerged from her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She climbed into her father's lap without speaking, simply needing his presence. Seth held her gently, and Ella saw the internal conflict on his face. Duty to truth versus duty to family. The impossible choice that had defined his life since Lila's death. I can go, Ella offered. I know the building, I have access codes. That Alec has changed, Seth said. But more importantly, you're the primary target. If you walk into Apex, you get arrested immediately. They're not looking for me with the same intensity. A janitor can move through that building almost invisible. Not anymore, Ashton interjected, showing them her phone. Alec had given another interview identifying Seth as Ella's accomplice, posting his photo, offering a reward for information leading to his location. You're both wanted now. Seth studied the screen, then looked at his sister. Can you keep Zoe safe? Take her somewhere Alec's people can't find her? Seth, no, Ashton protested. You're talking about walking into a hostile environment where people are actively hunting you. I'm talking about finishing what Reggie started, Seth said calmly. He looked down at Zoe, who was watching him with those two wise eyes. Sweetheart, Daddy needs to go help Miss Ella some more. Aunt Ashton is going to take you to that cabin we stayed at last summer, the one with the lake, so remember? Zoe's lower lip trembled. You promised you'd always come home. And I will, Seth said firmly. But it might take a little longer this time. Can you be brave for me? The little girl nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. She hugged her father desperately, and Ella had to look away from the intimacy of their goodbye. The terrible price that fighting for justice demanded from those who had already lost so much. After Ashton left with Zoe, the apartment felt emptier, colder. Seth moved with methodical precision, gathering equipment from hiding places throughout the small space. A security bypass device, network access tools, documentation that proved his former clearance levels. He'd been preparing for this possibility for 4 years, maintaining skills and equipment against the day when invisible janitor would need to become expert engineer again. There's another way. Ella tried one more time. We could give the evidence to investigators, let them secure the servers. By the time they get a warrant and coordinate with Apex's legal team, the files will be gone, Seth said, checking his gear. Alec has maybe 6 hours before investigators arrive with authority to seize everything. He's using that time to erase anything incriminating. I'm the only one who can stop him fast enough. Then I'm going with you, Ella decided. Seth looked at her seriously. Ella, if we both get caught, at least we went down fighting together instead of me hiding while you risked everything for evidence I need. She met his gaze with equal determination. You said we protect each other. That's not one-directional. A slow smile spread across Seth's face, respect and something warmer shining in his eyes. Okay, but we do this smart, not heroic. We get in, secure the data, and get out before anyone knows we were there. They drove toward Apex in Seth's aging sedan, watching the building grow larger as they approached. News vans surrounded the main entrance, federal vehicles filled the executive parking, and security presence had tripled. The building that Ella had designed to be welcoming and transparent now looked like a fortress. Service entrance on the east side, Seth directed, navigating to a delivery area largely ignored by media and investigators. Loading dock workers change shifts at 9. We go in with them, using the confusion for cover. He'd brought maintenance uniforms for both of them, and Ella found herself dressed in the same gray outfit that made workers invisible. It felt appropriate somehow, returning to her company disguised as the kind of employee that executives typically never noticed. They merged with the shift change crowd, Seth's ID badge still triggering the service entrance scanner despite being 4 years old. Security had never bothered updating the system because they'd never imagined a janitor posed a threat. That arrogance was about to cost them everything. Inside, the building felt different to Ella. The halls she'd walked confidently for years now felt hostile. Every camera a threat, every employee a potential witness. But Seth moved with absolute confidence, knowing exactly which corridors were monitored and which blind spots existed in coverage. They reached the server room on the 3rd basement level. Through the reinforced glass door, Ella could see rows of machines humming with processing power, and at a terminal in the center, a figure she recognized. Sean Douglas, one of Apex's senior IT administrators, someone she'd hired personally 3 years ago. Sean's executing the deletion, Ella whispered. But why? He wasn't part of the conspiracy. Probably doesn't know he's deleting evidence, Seth assessed. Alec likely told him it's routine maintenance or security protocol. Sean's following orders without understanding their purpose. Seth used his security bypass to unlock the door, and they entered quietly. Sean was focused on his screens, watching progress bars as files systematically disappeared. He didn't notice them until Seth spoke. Sean, stop what you're doing. The young man spun around, shocked. Seth? What are you doing here? And Miss White? Security said you were... Whatever security told you is part of a coordinated conspiracy to destroy evidence, Ella said quickly. The files you're deleting, They prove that Alec Jennings and the board have been committing fraud for years. Sean looked between them, confused and frightened. Mr. Jennings said this was a security purge, that we were removing corrupted files from Reggie Bishop's unauthorized access. Reggie wasn't unauthorized, Seth said firmly. He was investigating crimes. And those files you're deleting? They're proof of recent communications between Alec and his co-conspirators. Proof that even after Reggie died, the conspiracy continued. Understanding dawned on Sean's face, followed immediately by horror. Oh God, what have I done? I've deleted almost 30% of the tagged files. Can you recover them? Ella asked urgently. Maybe if I stop the deletion process and run recovery protocols. Sean's fingers flew across the keyboard. But it'll take time. And if anyone notices I've stopped. Let them notice, a voice said from the doorway. Alec Jennings stood there with 2 security guards. And unlike the corporate professional Ella had known, this version of Alec looked unraveled. His suit was rumpled, his eyes showing the sleeplessness of someone watching their plans collapse. You've both made this so much more difficult than it needed to be. The security guards moved to block the exit, and Ella felt her pulse accelerate. They were trapped in the server room with the man who'd orchestrated everything, who'd killed Reggie and destroyed Seth's life, and framed her for crimes he'd committed. Alec, it's over, Ella said, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. Reggie's evidence is public. Investigators are building cases. Deleting these files won't save you. Maybe not, Alec agreed, pulling a gun from his jacket. The casual way he held it suggested this wasn't his first time threatening someone with lethal force. But I can ensure I'm not the only one who goes down. You two, the crusading CEO and the vengeful janitor, you've destroyed everything I built here. If I'm finished, I'm taking you with me. Seth positioned himself slightly in front of Ella, his body language protective. You didn't build anything, Alec. You infiltrated, corrupted, and destroyed. There's a difference. Is there? Alec's laugh was bitter. Ella built Apex from idealistic dreams about technology serving humanity. Naive, childish. I made it profitable. I made it powerful. I turned a feel-good startup into a real corporation that understood how the world actually works. By installing backdoors in security systems, Ella said, anger overriding fear. By enabling surveillance and theft. By murdering Reggie when he tried to stop you. Alec's expression flickered with something that might have been regret, but vanished too quickly to be certain. Reggie's death was necessary. He'd become a liability, too committed to his moral crusade to see reason. I gave him multiple opportunities to walk away wealthy and silent. He refused. So you poisoned him, Seth stated flatly. Made it look like a heart attack. I did what had to be done to protect the operation, Alec corrected. Just like I'm doing now. He gestured with the gun toward Sean. You, resume the deletion. Erase everything that's left. And you two, I need you to understand something. Even if I go to prison, even if Reggie's evidence destroys me, I've already won in the ways that matter. I've made $50 million from this conspiracy. That money is hidden in accounts that investigators will never find, in countries with no extradition treaties. Whatever sentence I serve, I come out wealthy. Is that what this was about? Ella asked, disgusted. Just money? Money is freedom, Alex said. Money is power. All your idealism about changing the world, Ella, it was always going to be corrupted by people who understood that truth better than you did. Seth had been slowly moving his hand toward the maintenance tools on his belt, calculating angles and distances. You're right that money is power, Alec. But you forgot something important about power structures. They depend on people following orders without thinking. Once those people start questioning, once they realize they're complicit in crimes, the power collapses. He nodded toward the security guards. These two, for instance. They signed up to protect people and property. Are they really willing to become accessories to murder? Because that's what happens if you shoot us. They're witnesses, accomplices, facing life sentences alongside you. One of the guards, younger and visibly uncomfortable, shifted his stance. Mr. Jennings, maybe we should call the police. Let them handle this. Don't be stupid, Alex snapped. We're beyond police intervention. This is about containing damage, eliminating threats before they can testify. Eliminate? The guard's voice rose. You're talking about killing them. I'm talking about protecting all of us, Alec insisted. You think investigators will believe you were just following orders? You're already implicated. Your only chance is to see this through. But Seth had read the situation correctly. The guards were corporate security, not criminals. They'd been manipulated into complicity, but hadn't signed up for murder. The younger guard backed toward the door, shaking his head. No, this is insane. I'm calling the police. Alex swung the gun toward him. You move, and I'll... Seth moved faster. Years of studying physical security, of training in threat response, had given him reflexes that months behind a desk had only slightly dulled. He grabbed a metal bracket from the server rack and threw it with precise force, striking Alex's hand. The gun fired, the maybe's doors, sound deafening in the enclosed space. But the shot went wide, shattering a server display instead of hitting anyone. Then Seth was on Alec, grappling for the weapon. They crashed into equipment, Alec fighting with the desperation of someone watching their life implode. Seth fighting with the controlled fury of someone who'd lost too much to criminals like this. The gun fell from Alec's grip, skidding across the floor. The older security guard retrieved it, holding it uncertainly, clearly out of his depth. Ella moved quickly, placing herself between the guard and the struggle. Call building security. Tell them there's a situation in the server room and to bring federal investigators immediately. The guard nodded, grateful for clear instructions, and made the call while his younger colleague helped Seth restrain Alec. Within minutes, the server room was flooded with people. Real police, federal investigators, Apex security trying to understand what was happening. Alec was pulled away from Seth, handcuffed, and read his rights while still screaming about conspiracies and frame jobs. Ella watched it happen with surreal detachment. It should have felt like victory, but mostly it felt like exhaustion. 4 years of corruption exposed in one chaotic morning, Reggie's sacrifice finally vindicated, and the company she'd built torn apart by revelations of systematic betrayal. Seth stood beside her, breathing hard, a bruise already forming on his cheek where Alec had landed a punch. You okay? He asked. I don't know, Ella answered honestly. Are you? Ask me in a few days, Seth said, then looked around at the chaos. We did it. It's actually over. A federal investigator approached them, badge extended. Ella White? Seth Newman? We need to take your statements. But I want you to know that based on the evidence we've reviewed, you're both being treated as witnesses and cooperating parties, not suspects. It was the official confirmation of what they'd fought for. Recognition that they were the victims and whistleblowers, not the criminals. Ella felt something release in her chest. Tension she'd been carrying since the moment security had surrounded her in the boardroom. One more thing, the investigator added. We've secured the servers. Your IT administrator here, Sean Douglas, managed to halt the deletion process and recovered most of the files. Between Reggie Bishop's archived evidence and what's on these servers, we have a complete picture of the conspiracy. Sean stood nervously nearby, clearly shaken by how close he'd come to being an unwitting accomplice. "Ms. White, I'm so sorry. If I'd known what I was really doing—" "You were manipulated," Ella said gently. "Like all of us were. But you stopped when you learned the truth. That's what matters." As investigators processed the scene, Ella and Seth were escorted to a quiet conference room for preliminary interviews. Hours passed in recounting details, in answering questions, in reconstructing the timeline of their nightmarish journey from hostage situation to confrontation. But finally, as afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, they were released. "You're free to go?" the lead investigator said. "We'll need more formal statements in the coming days. But for now, you've given us what we need to move forward with arrests and indictments." They walked out of Apex Technologies together, emerging into a media circus. News cameras caught them immediately, reporters shouting questions. But instead of the hostile accusations from the night before, the questions now reflected the shifted narrative. "Ms. White, how does it feel to expose the conspiracy?" "Mr. Newman, what made you risk everything to fight for justice?" Ella raised her hand for quiet, and surprisingly, the crowd settled. Reggie Bishop died trying to expose corruption at Apex Technologies. Everything that's happened in the past 24 hours, all of the evidence now in federal hands, exists because he spent 2 years sacrificing his safety to document the truth. If there's a hero in this story, it's Reggie. We just finished what he started. She looked at Seth, standing beside her with that quiet strength that had become her anchor. And if you want to know what real courage looks like, it's not the CEO fighting to reclaim her company. It's the single father who lost everything, who spent 4 years working in obscurity, who risked orphaning his daughter because he believed truth mattered more than safety. Seth Newman saved me. But more than that, he saved the principle that justice can triumph over power if someone is willing to fight for it. The reporters erupted with follow-up questions, but Seth gently guided Ella away, toward his car parked in the service lot. As they drove away from Apex, away from the media circus and the federal investigation and the ruins of what had been her company, Ella felt something unexpected. Not regret or bitterness, but possibility. "What happens now?" she asked Seth as they navigated toward his apartment. "Now?" Seth smiled slightly. "Now I pick up my daughter from my sister's cabin, make her favorite dinner, and reassure her that Daddy kept his promise to come home. And you start rebuilding, not just your career, but your life. Figure out what comes after Apex, what you want to create next." "I might need help with that," Ella said carefully. "Strategic planning, security systems, someone who understands how to build things that can't be corrupted by people with bad intentions." Seth glanced at her, understanding the implicit offer. "Is that a job proposal, Ms. White?" "It's a partnership proposal, Mr. Newman," Ella corrected. "Equal stakes, shared vision, building something new from the lessons we learned. No corporate hierarchy, no board of directors who can betray us. Just 2 people who've seen the worst of what power can become and want to create something better." Seth pulled into his apartment complex, parking in his numbered space. "That sounds ambitious. Also sounds like exactly what Reggie would have wanted." "So is that a yes?" Ella asked. "That's a conversation we have after I get Zoe and after you've slept for 24 hours straight," Seth said practically. "But yes, it's a provisional yes, pending approval from my most important stakeholder, Zoe gets veto power? Zoe gets veto power, Seth confirmed. If we're building something together, it has to work for all three of us. The casual way he included his daughter in their potential future touched Ella deeply. This wasn't just about business or redemption. It was about creating something that honored everything they'd survived, everyone they'd lost, and everyone they were still fighting to protect. As the sun set on what had been the longest, most terrifying, and ultimately most transformative day of Ella's life, she realized that sometimes losing everything was the only way to discover what truly mattered. 3 weeks later, Ella stood in Seth's apartment watching Zoe demonstrate her multiplication homework with the fierce concentration of someone determined to get every answer perfect. The little girl had accepted Ella's frequent presence with the adaptability that 7-year-olds possessed, though she still occasionally studied Ella with assessing eyes, as if determining whether this new person in their lives was worthy of her father's attention. The media storm had finally subsided. Alec Jennings and 4 board members faced federal charges. Apex Technologies was undergoing complete restructuring under court supervision. And Ella had become an unlikely symbol of corporate whistleblowing, invited to speak at conferences and congressional hearings about the importance of accountability. But today, she was just sitting in a modest apartment eating takeout pizza with a former janitor and his daughter, discussing plans for something new. Truth Guard Technologies. Zoe read from the business plan Ella had drafted. That's a good name. Sounds like superheroes. That's the idea. Ella smiled. We build security systems that protect people instead of exploiting them. Seth leaned back on the couch, his expression thoughtful. It'll take years to build credibility after what happened at Apex. People won't trust easily. Good, Ella said firmly. We don't want easy trust. We want to earn it by being transparent and accountable. Reiji taught us that systems without integrity eventually collapse. Zoe abandoned her homework to climb onto her father's lap. Miss Ella comes over a lot now, she observed with a 7-year-old's blunt honesty. Are you going to get married like people do on TV? Both adults froze. Seth recovered first, his cheeks slightly flushed. Sweetheart, that's not how adult relationships work. Miss Ella and I are building a business together. But you smile different when she's here, Zoe persisted with devastating accuracy. Like how you smiled in pictures with Mommy. Ella felt her heart race, recognizing truth in the observation she'd been avoiding examining. She did feel something beyond professional respect for Seth, something that had grown during their shared crisis and deepened in these quiet moments of planning their future. Seth met Ella's eyes across the room, and she saw her own uncertainty reflected there. Maybe, he said carefully to his daughter, people who fight through hard things together sometimes discover they want to keep being together. But that takes time and conversation and making sure everyone's ready. I'm ready, Zoe declared. Miss Ella brings good snacks, and she doesn't treat me like a baby. Plus, Daddy's less sad when she visits. The simple wisdom of it made Ella laugh. Well, if we have Zoe's approval, that's the most important stakeholder handled. Don't encourage her, Seth protested. But he was smiling, the genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. As evening settled and Zoe returned to homework, Ella looked around the small apartment that had become her sanctuary. It wasn't the executive office she'd lost or the penthouse she'd owned. But it held something more valuable. People who knew her at her worst and chose her anyway. Who built trust through crisis rather than convenience. Who understood that real strength wasn't avoiding loss, but surviving it. Outside, Harborview's lights glittered with possibility. Somewhere in that city, Other people were fighting their own battles against corruption, facing their own moments of choosing between safety and integrity. Ella hoped that when those people felt most alone, they'd remember that sometimes the person who saves you comes from the most unexpected place. Sometimes your hero wears a janitor's uniform and keeps promises to a 7-year-old about always coming home. And sometimes, in the ruins of everything you built, you discover the foundation for something infinitely better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.